The day my husband threw me and our 12-day-old twins out into the freezing cold, he thought he was ending a marriage. His mother stood behind him with her arms folded, smiling like she'd finally won. "Take your babies and leave," she said.
So I did.
I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even cry. I simply walked away carrying my newborns into the snow. 9 days later, someone knocked on their front door. By the time they realized who was standing there, their perfect little world had already fallen apart. The first time my mother-in-law held my newborn twins, she didn't smile. She looked at them for exactly 3 seconds before handing my daughter back to me. "They're beautiful," she said flatly. "Now, let's hope you learn how to raise them." Everyone laughed. I forced myself to smile because I had just given birth 10 days earlier, and I was too exhausted to argue. Looking back now, I should have realized that wasn't a joke. It was a warning. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, an interior designer, and until that winter, I believed I had a happy marriage. My husband, Daniel, and I had been together for 6 years. He used to be patient,
Kind.
the kind of man who brought me coffee every morning and never forgot our anniversary. When I became pregnant with twins, he cried before I did. He kissed my forehead and promised, "We're going to be the best parents." I believed every word. But somewhere between our babies being born and coming home from the hospital, my husband slowly disappeared, and his mother took his place. Margaret insisted she was moving in just for a few weeks to help with the babies. Daniel thought it was a wonderful idea. I wasn't so sure. From the first morning she arrived, she criticized everything I did. "You're holding him wrong. They're eating too often. You should already have the house clean." When I raised Daniel, I never looked this tired. I wanted to remind her that I'd given birth less than 2 weeks earlier. Instead, I stayed quiet, because arguing required energy I didn't have. The twins woke every 2 hours. Some nights, I slept less than 90 minutes. Every time I finally closed my eyes, one of them would cry. Still, I never complained. Every tiny smile, every little yawn, every time they wrapped their tiny fingers around mine, made every sleepless night worth it. But Margaret didn't see any of that. She only saw flaws. One afternoon, she walked into the nursery while I was rocking both babies. She folded her arms. "You're spoiling them. They're newborns," I answered softly. "They need comfort. They need discipline." I looked at her, honestly wondering if she'd forgotten what newborn babies were like. Before I could answer, Daniel walked in. I expected him to laugh. Instead, he said, "Maybe Mom has a point." Those 6 words hurt far more than I wanted to admit. That night, I cried in the shower where nobody could hear me. Not because of Margaret. Because Daniel hadn't defended me. Over the next week, things only got worse. Margaret criticized every meal I cooked. She complained that I wasn't keeping the house spotless. She even started telling visitors that she was the one raising those babies. Whenever I corrected her, Daniel asked me not to start arguments. Arguments? I wasn't starting them. I was simply trying to exist inside my own home. Then came the morning everything changed. It was freezing outside. Snow covered the yard, and the weather forecast warned everyone to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. The twins had finally fallen asleep after a difficult night. I carefully placed them in their bassinets and quietly made myself a cup of tea. I hadn't even taken my first sip. Margaret stormed into the kitchen. "Daniel." Her voice echoed through the house. "He needs to see this." Daniel walked downstairs, rubbing his eyes. "What happened?" She pointed toward the sink. "There are bottles that haven't been washed." I stared at her. "I fed them 20 minutes ago. You should have cleaned them immediately." "I was going to." "You were going to," she repeated mockingly. "That's always your excuse." I took a slow breath. "I'm doing my best." She laughed. "No, Emily. You aren't." Daniel crossed his arms. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I looked at him. "Can you please say something?" He sighed. "Maybe everyone just needs to calm down." Margaret shook her head dramatically.
No.
"I'm done watching my son live like this." She stepped closer until we were only a few feet apart. "You've turned this house upside down. You can't even keep simple things organized. You've become nothing but another responsibility. My heart pounded. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to remind her I'd carried those babies for 9 months, that I was healing, that I hadn't slept properly in days. Instead, I simply looked at Daniel, waiting,
Begging. Praying.
he would finally stand beside me. Instead, he lowered his eyes. Margaret pointed toward the front door. Take your twins and leave. The room became completely silent. I waited for Daniel to say, Mom, enough. He never did. Instead, he quietly whispered, I think that's for the best, just until everyone calms down. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It became perfectly clear. Without saying another word, I walked upstairs. I dressed my babies in their warmest winter clothes, wrapped each of them in thick blankets, picked up the diaper bag. Then I walked back downstairs. Neither Daniel nor his mother tried to stop me. As I reached the front door, I turned the handle. Cold winter air rushed inside. Before I stepped out into the snow, I looked back one last time. Neither of them noticed that for just a single second, I smiled. The wind stung my face as I carried my twins across the driveway. Each step through the snow felt heavier than the last. Not because of the babies. Because 20 minutes earlier, my husband had chosen his mother's voice over mine. I tightened the blankets around my son and daughter before placing them gently into the back seat of my SUV. For a moment, I rested both hands on the steering wheel. The tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. Just silent tears that rolled down my cheeks while my babies slept peacefully behind me. I allowed myself exactly 2 minutes. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't head toward a shelter. I didn't call friends asking for a couch. And I definitely didn't turn around. Instead, I drove across town to a boutique extended stay hotel overlooking the river. The receptionist smiled as soon as she saw me. Good evening, Miss Carter. Welcome back. Back. Those single words would have shocked Daniel, because this wasn't the first time I'd stayed there. Long before I got married, I traveled often for work. Interior design projects had taken me across several states, and this hotel chain had become my favorite place to stay. The manager personally upgraded my room after seeing the twins. Within 20 minutes, they had brought a crib, blankets, warm bottles, and extra pillows. For the first time in days, I felt safe. That night, after the twins finally fell asleep, I opened my laptop. An email notification blinked across the screen. Congratulations on another successful project. It came from one of my largest commercial clients. Attached was the final payment. I smiled, because there was something almost no one knew about me, including my husband. Before Daniel and I married, I had started my own online interior design business. At first it was tiny. One client became 3. 3 became 20. Eventually I hired freelance architects and graphic artists. Even after the twins were born, the business continued running because my team handled most of the daily work. Every month, the company quietly generated more income than my full-time design salary ever had. I never hid it. Daniel simply never asked. Whenever extra money appeared, I used it to pay household bills, vacations, furniture, or savings. He always assumed everything came from our joint account. I never corrected him, not because I wanted credit, because marriage wasn't supposed to be a competition. The next morning my phone finally rang. Daniel. I watched it vibrate until it stopped. A minute later, another call, then another. Finally, a text appeared. Are you coming home today? I looked down at my sleeping twins, then locked my phone. No reply. Across town, Daniel was discovering something he had never noticed before. The refrigerator wasn't full by itself. The laundry didn't magically fold itself. Diapers didn't reorder themselves. Bills didn't organize themselves. And babies certainly didn't settle themselves at 2 o'clock in the morning. Margaret had insisted I was the problem. Now she was learning exactly how much work I'd been quietly carrying every single day. 2 days later, my closest friend, Rachel, visited the hotel. She hugged me without asking questions. Sometimes the people who love you most understand your silence better than anyone else's words.
I brought coffee, she said.
And breakfast. She looked around the suite. So, what's the plan? I took a slow sip before answering. I'm not running. I'm rebuilding. Rachel smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. That afternoon, I met with a family attorney. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted stability. The twins deserve certainty. The lawyer carefully reviewed our financial records. She looked surprised. You've contributed much more to the household than these records suggest. I never kept score. She nodded. Most healthy marriages don't. Together we reviewed everything. Mortgage payments, insurance, savings, business income, investment accounts. Every document painted the same picture. I hadn't been dependent on Daniel. We had been partners. The difference was, I'd never used that fact against him. Over the next several days, friends quietly reached out. Former clients sent flowers. Neighbors checked on the babies. One elderly couple from our old street even dropped off homemade soup with a handwritten note. Strong mothers raise strong children. I cried when I read it, not because I felt weak, because kindness always seems louder after betrayal. Meanwhile, Margaret couldn't understand why I hadn't called. Give her another day, she kept telling Daniel. She'll realize she has nowhere else to go. But another day passed. Then another. Still nothing. The silence began frightening them far more than any argument ever could. On the 7th morning, Daniel opened our mailbox. Inside was a large certified envelope. He carried it into the kitchen. Margaret looked up from her coffee. What is it? Daniel slowly opened the package. His face lost every trace of color. His hands started trembling. He looked at the first page, then the second. Finally, he whispered words his mother never expected to hear. Emily already has a lawyer. Margaret laughed nervously. She's bluffing. Daniel continued reading. No. His voice barely rose above a whisper.
She isn't.
At that exact moment, my phone began ringing again. I looked at Daniel's name on the screen. This time, I let him hear exactly what silence sounded like. 9 days after I walked out of that house carrying my twins, someone knocked on my hotel room door. I already knew who it was. Not because anyone had called. Because people who mistake kindness for weakness almost always come back when they realize what they've lost. I opened the door. Daniel stood there alone. His shoulders were slumped. Dark circles framed his eyes. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely defeated. Emily, his voice cracked. Can we talk? I stepped into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind me. The twins were finally asleep. I only have a few minutes. He nodded. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't answer. I shouldn't have let you leave. You didn't let me leave, I replied calmly. You watched me leave. His eyes dropped to the floor. Mom kept saying it was for the best. I took a slow breath. Daniel, you're 35 years old. You don't get to blame your mother for your own decisions. He looked like I'd slapped him. I know. I didn't think you'd actually leave. There it was. The truth. Not that he wanted me gone. He simply believed I had nowhere else to go. He thought I'd return, apologize, pretend nothing had happened. Instead, I'd built a new routine without him. I miss the twins, he whispered. I know. I miss you. I looked at him for a long moment, then quietly said,
No.
You miss the life you took for granted. He opened his mouth, closed it again, because deep down, he knew I was right. I'm sorry, he said. I know those words don't fix anything. They don't. He nodded slowly. I understand. For the first time in days,
I saw the man I'd married.
Not the one hiding behind his mother's opinions. The man who finally understood the weight of his choices. Unfortunately, understanding arrives much later than consequences. Over the next several weeks, our attorneys handled everything professionally. There were no screaming matches, no public accusations, no attempts to humiliate each other, just paperwork, meetings, and difficult conversations. When the financial records were reviewed, one fact became impossible to ignore. Our home had been built through both of our efforts. My business income had quietly supported far more of our life than anyone realized. Daniel never argued about it. He simply signed what was fair. A few days before the agreement was finalized, my phone rang again. This time, it was Margaret. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. Her voice sounded completely different.
Soft.
Careful. Almost nervous. Emily, I think we've all made mistakes. I stayed silent. You know, the twins deserve both sides of the family. They do. So, when are you coming home? I actually smiled. Not because she was funny, because she still didn't understand. I already am home. She hesitated. What do you mean? I mean, a home isn't the place someone forces you to leave. It's the place where you're respected. She had no answer. After a few awkward seconds, the call ended. A month later, the legal process was complete. I moved into a beautiful townhouse not far from my design studio. It wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. Every room was filled with peace. The nursery overlooked a small park. Every morning sunlight poured through the windows while the twins laughed from their cribs. For the first time in months, I wasn't surviving. I was living. My business continued growing. Several of the commercial projects I'd designed won regional awards. New clients arrived through recommendations. Within a year, I hired 3 full-time designers. The company I'd quietly built at my kitchen table had become something far bigger than I'd ever imagined. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after everything happened, I took the twins to a community festival. They were walking now, holding one tiny hand each while they laughed at every balloon and food truck they passed. Then, I saw them. Daniel and Margaret, standing near a coffee stand. Neither of them noticed me at first. When Daniel finally looked up, our eyes met. He smiled sadly. Margaret stood beside him, unusually quiet. No anger, no criticism, no commands, just silence. Daniel gave a small wave. I returned it. Nothing more. There was nothing left to argue about. Nothing left to prove. I bent down, adjusted my son's little winter hat, picked up my daughter before she wandered toward a fountain, and continued walking. Neither of us looked back. Because some endings don't need dramatic speeches. The greatest victory isn't making the people who hurt you regret their choices. It's building a life so full of peace that their approval no longer matters. They believed throwing me out with my twins would destroy my future. Instead, it became the day I finally walked toward it.